Okay, give them a big hand. The directors of the movie, Dana Nachman and Don Hardy. Please join me. I would also like to introduce to you Marieke Helgren. She is also in the movie. Please join us. And we also invited an expert, a Dutch expert on the subject. Her name is Juliet Legler, and she's from the University of Amsterdam, professor in toxicology. Please join us. You can sit here, thanks. Okay, what I was wondering to the directors, what is your personal link with this subject? Why did you decide to make this movie?
So I was a producer at a television station in the United States, NBC, and I was assigned a story on this issue, how to make your home less toxic. And I didn't know that your home was toxic, and this was in 2009 or 8. And I learned one simple fact, which was that most of the products that we use in our homes, on our bodies, are not tested for their safety, and I thought couldn't be true, so I did a very short amount of Googling and realized it was very true, and that shock turned into this film.
Okay, great. And I was wondering, seeing the film, why are there no manufacturers of chemicals in the movie? Maybe you get that question more often, but...
Well, it isn't for lack of trying. Calls, repeated calls, emails, and nobody would go on camera from the industry side of things.
Over years.
Oh, really? Yeah, because some companies, like Procter & Gamble, they declined, but just any manufacturer declined to be in the film.
We didn't want to just choose any manufacturer. We really wanted anybody we talked about specifically, and then the American Chemistry Council, which is the group that represents all of them, because they really pull the strings in terms of legislation and impacting legislation. So we really wanted them, and it took a long time to get a no from them. They strung it along for a long time and then finally said no. And then when there were some changes in federal legislation, even after they said no, we tried again. So we keep, maybe we'll try again even.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we contemplated just trying to, sort of attack them on the street, with that sort of, that's not the style that we take, and it just didn't seem to fit the structure of the film to do that confrontational thing.
Okay, great. Julia, can you shortly explain to the audience what your link to the subject is?
Thank you, and first I'd really like to compliment the directors. I really enjoyed the movie. I think it is indeed a very alarming subject. I think you portrayed it well, and I recognize a lot of the scientists you interviewed, so you really did get some excellent scientists on board, some of the famous names in this field. And I like the way that you also showed alternatives, and that innovation could lead to change as well. So I'm a professor of toxicology and environmental health at the VU University, and so I've been working with chemicals and the effects of chemicals on human and wildlife health for about 20 years now. I just recently finished a large European project in which I coordinated with 7 different laboratories throughout Europe, in which we looked at the effect of development of exposure, so exposure early in life in pregnancy and during breastfeeding of children, and the effect of these chemicals on growth and obesity and diabetes in children. So I'm looking at endocrine effects of these chemicals.
And should we be as scared as I am now after seeing this film for chemicals? Or?
Well, I think that in Europe we do indeed have some very good laws and regulations in place to change the way things have been done in the past. So there was a short segment on REACH, and that's the European regulation. And I think REACH is a really amazing step forward. It started about 5 years ago, putting the responsibility in the industry's hands instead of in government hands or in the hands of the scientists to come up after the chemicals on the market to show that it's dangerous. So the changes to legislations have been really good. It's a slow process. It does mean that in Europe, industry is required to test their chemicals if they produce their chemicals in a certain amount per year. So the first steps have been taken with large volume production chemicals. So these are chemicals that produce really a lot, and all these chemicals have to fulfill a certain testing requirements, and these are animal tests that are used as a replacement for humans in order to say something about their effects on cancer, and reproductive effects.
Okay.
So
first steps have been made, but we're not there yet, if I understand correctly.
Where I think we're not there yet, and where we're trying, and there's a big debate ongoing now, is to not only look at the very more obvious effects. Does a human or an animal not reproduce? Does it get cancer? These are, of course, extremely important. But we're really worried about very low levels of chemicals and their effects on hormone systems. These are very subtle effects that may ultimately lead into somebody not being able to reproduce properly, or somebody getting diabetes at the end of their life. And these are very difficult effects to show. But we think that there's enough evidence for chemicals doing this, and we want regulation and legislation to look at these types of effects in chemicals as well.
Okay. So, are there any questions from the audience? Sir, could you... Oh yeah, the microphone is coming your way.
Yes, I'm Marijn Frank, a physician from Amsterdam. I'm so astonished that the chemical industry seems to be so reluctant to change their policies, because it's in their interest. I mean, you cannot produce, you cannot sell for dead people. So why keep them so afraid? I mean, the amount of illness which we see, and to which medicine is practically powerless at the moment, if you see the amount of the illnesses which have been registered, it's totally insane what's happening. Also economically speaking. And that's what they are apparently very concerned about the continuing of their concerns, of their companies and so on. And
yeah, it's very short-sighted.
Very short-sighted. So what's your impression when you spoke to these in these areas, and also question to maybe to Judith, what would be the interest to stop innovation, or to work against it?
Yeah.
Well, one interesting thing someone told me while researching this film, but I couldn't really get it substantiated enough to put in the film, but I believe it anyway, was that a lot of these companies are speaking out against these laws, are fighting them tooth and nail. They're fighting as much as they can with lobbyists, but on the other side of their business, which is much more in the shadows, they're working towards change because they know that the time is coming where the consumers will rise up and not stand for it anymore. So while they're saying these are totally safe and we don't need legislation, we don't need regulation, they know the time is coming. So they're spending a lot of money in research and development on better products, but will wait until it's absolutely necessary to use them because their infrastructures are set for the old kind of chemicals. So that's something I'm hearing.
Okay, interesting. Any other questions?
Maybe I could fill that in from the European standpoint. In that now, most industries will say, well, we are complying to these new legislations, to this REACH chemical regulation. So this means our chemicals have been tested, so they're safe. So what you're finding, it may be due to scientific uncertainty, or these are epidemiological studies. These are studies in human populations. You can't exclude a lot of other lifestyle factors, so that the evidence becomes even in their eyes less clear. And they've already complied to all of these testing standards. They have to. So that becomes an argument from the European industry saying we've done everything we have to do. Why should we do more?
They say the same in the United States too.
But it's so simple. I mean, if you go to
Oh, please wait for the microphone, sir.
But it's so simple to counter that argument, because if you go to one supermarket here next door and you go to the cosmetics area, you see everywhere parabens on it, and then you can see parabens are carcinogenic. So what do you say then?
Well, they would say our parabens are not carcinogenic because we tested them in the test, the animal test, the 2-generation toxicity test, 2 years long. they're in our cosmetic products at levels that are too low to be linked to carcinogenicity, according to the standards. So that would be their argument. Not that I agree with that, but that's the way the law works now.
And I don't know about REACH, but you probably know, they say the dose makes the poison, and so if our dose is only this much, they're not taking into account the million or the hundreds, if not thousands of exposures we're getting every day, and I don't know if REACH goes deeper into that. It does not.
No, so the industry has to estimate what the exposure is from using that cosmetic product, and that exposure is so much lower than where the toxicologist will say the level is where there's no effect. They are allowed to put it on the market. But indeed, what there's no legislation for yet is how to take that one little chemical together with the hundreds or thousands of other chemicals, all present at very low levels where individually they may not cause toxicity. We don't know how to handle them in a cocktail or in a mixture. That's a big challenge that the European chemical legislation is facing at the moment. They're thinking about it, at least. It might take another 5 years to come up with some legislation, but people are thinking about it.
So you've been doing a lot of protests against these dangerous chemicals. Can you give us an update?
Sure, and actually I wanted to add on to the conversation around corporations and the sort of lack of motivation to make a change. And one of the strategies that's very popular, particularly in California, are market-based campaigns where we're really voting with our dollars, really, selecting the companies that are doing the right thing and patronizing them, and then, choosing companies that aren't really choosing the right chemicals and trying to avoid spending money with those companies. And for better or for worse, in our society, that is very effective. Personally, I tend to focus a little bit more on the legislative side, because I think it has much more sweeping impact. But we have certainly found that when you can alert people, BPA is a really good example of one of the chemicals that we've really been able to bring to the forefront simply because of consumer awareness. And as a result, you can, everywhere you go, BPA free, which is great, but it's one out of tens of thousands of chemicals. So, for me personally, I put my efforts towards comprehensive chemical policy reform, because I don't think we can keep doing this, chipping away one chemical at a time. Yeah. The BPA issue is a really interesting one because it's great that we've gotten BPA out, but what did we replace it with?
Yeah.
We don't know. We don't know if it's safer, we don't know if it's better, and it's just, we're not going to be able to achieve the kind of large-scale effect of reducing our body burden, reducing chemicals until we get comprehensive chemical policy reform. And where we're at right now in the States is we're still pretty far from it. There is some legislation in the works, but it's simply not strong enough, so it doesn't have the support of most of the groups that I do some of my volunteer advocacy with. So we're not there. It's really difficult. I've done some lobbying in DC, and excuse me, it's very, very tough. It's very weighted towards the chemical industry. I mean, the numbers that we talked about in the film are really borne out by my own experience, where I would go in and I would lobby, and they would be honestly surprised to see a young woman who wasn't paid by anybody to be there and lobby, and they would say to me, I got this several times, we see so many white guys in suits. We're so glad to have you here in our office. And that was really sort of surprising to me. I mean, I guess it shouldn't have been, but I was a little bit naive before I started spending some time on the Hill, and it's a little unbalanced.
Totally. Yes, sir. Is there, yeah.
Hello. We saw several people also talking about the labels for special bad things, the bad goods that put the labels in the shelves. And like a normal human being like me, I'm not investigating all the stuff I put on me every day. Is it coming up something like a safety label, safety signal, to find out quite easily in the shop what I have to buy or what I do not have to buy?
I think I'll let you answer in Europe, but one of the very frustrating things that's happening in the U.S. You saw in the Washington state scene, all they were really doing was they weren't asking to take these chemicals out, they were just asking to identify the chemicals, and even that got banned like that. And the same was really going for the flame retardants. It wasn't saying you have to ban them, it was just saying label which ones have them so consumers can buy others. This just happened in California and in Washington state with GMOs, genetically modified foods. They were just asking for labeling, and it all got, I mean, there was millions, I mean, I think almost 100 million of those two states only combined of industry money going into that. So we're asking for labeling, and then the consumers can really decide, and they're fighting tooth and nail for that not to happen.
And how's it in Europe?
Yeah, so in the Netherlands we have a number of labels. We know we have biological, organic food. We're not using any pesticides. I must say though that in the Scandinavian countries they seem to have a much better system that I'd really like to get some more attention for in the Netherlands, and that's something called the eco-label, the Swan eco-label. And there's at least 80 products who have gotten this label because they have been shown not to contain toxic chemicals or chemicals with suspected endocrine disrupting properties. So there are even within Europe some countries that are ahead of the Netherlands, and I hope that this type of film and this type of audience will all give us some reason to go out and lobby ourselves for these kinds of labels and information about the products that we're using in our everyday lives.
And if I can add, what we've done, what some of the really interesting, exciting groups in the United States has done to address that is to actually create their own database of all the chemicals. And you can imagine it's a massive, massive database, but it's very empowering, it's very exciting. You can go on, and if you use Dove soap, you can put Dove soap in there, and it will tell you on a scale of 1 to 10 how hazardous it is. So, if you're in the red, you want to stay away from that. If you're in the green, you want to go there. But that's a go-round, and that's also assuming that the consumer is aware of that database, has access to that database, and is going to take the time to look into that database. So again, it's really, we need to switch the system so that we don't have to all walk around with a little database of what's bad for us.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've never even thought about, the shampoo or well, I did think about the toys for my baby. That's kind of known in Holland now also, but like shampoo or makeup, I mean, you never even think about it. And also with those labels, I think it's because in Holland you see more and more eco labels, but you've got like 50 different ones. And then, I mean, this one is not as bad as the other one, but is it good? And all these things you don't know as a customer. I think that's very confusing.
And we have a term in the United States called greenwashing.
Yes,
where, you see things that says, natural, organic. They actually have changed the requirements around some of that, so that's good that you can't just call something organic unless it's certified by an independent agency.
Yeah.
But we see that a lot, that corporations are just trying to ride the bandwagon of the green movement and saying it's natural or, all these funny terms, and a lot of people kind of fall for it.
Yeah, it's pure marketing, yeah. And maybe you can just stand up and scream because you're in the middle of a row.
Hi, I'm really enjoying the film, and I'm very much for the cause of.
I'm really for the cause of regulating chemical testing, but I'm also against animal testing. And I was just wondering if those two causes have to be mutually exclusive, or are there other alternatives to chemical testing?
The scientist gets to answer this one. That's a very good question, and that was really one of the major concerns of the new chemical regulations in Europe, that by making it mandatory that industry does a certain base set of toxicity testing, this would cause a lot of suffering and a lot of animal lives. This is a very important aspect, and it does entail animal testing. Animal testing in toxicology is one of the major uses of animals in the world, in all the different scientific disciplines, because we say we cannot directly test a human. Indirectly, in the human experiment we are, but we cannot directly test a human. We cannot easily, there are no really good alternatives to say, how is it, as an organism exposed to a chemical, how is it metabolized, how is it distributed through the body, how does it cause toxicity, without using an animal. So the way it goes now, animals are required. However, REACH is, this chemical regulations is really trying to support the development of new alternative strategies. So if an industry has evidence from scientific testing of their chemical that doesn't use an animal, for example, if they use, you could take cells of an animal and you can put them in a petri dish, and that doesn't, you can make those cells live forever, sort of thing. You don't have to use an animal for them. You can just look at the cells. Or you could use computer models that really well model how a chemical binds to a certain protein in the body. These are computer models that are alternatives for animal studies. If the industry has these types of techniques and alternatives, they are required to put the information forward. This is also to promote innovation, because these animal tests are really expensive. So if the industry has information alternatives, or they don't, they could definitely develop new tests that are good alternatives for animal studies. So to make a long story short, we need animals for this work. We're trying to develop new alternatives, and industry has to pay an important responsibility in doing so.
Yes. I would just wonder, kind of a comment to that is, one of the things that I thought was striking was at the very end of the film when one of the doctors said about, do we need scientific proof or do what's reasonable? We have a lot of scientific studies already that talk about risks. So the animals have already been used. How many studies do we need on BPA, or do we need on some of these carcinogens that we know are out there? The industry, as far as I can tell, is just going to keep the studies going and going until there's proof, which will be beyond our lifetime. So I think it's also a matter of maybe saying, people like the labeling issue, this is in there, it has been shown to cause cancer, we don't need to prove it's going to cause your cancer, but is that enough for you not to want to use it? Instead of keeping exposing ourselves, animals, everyone else for it.
Yeah, that's correct. Okay, I just had one, oh, well, sorry, the lady here? Yes, you, looking around for the microphone. She's here.
Sorry, I was not too convinced by the film, but more maybe by the way the story was told. I found it very repetitive. So, I mean, the stories were all kind of very similar. And I would have enjoyed, or I think it would have been interesting to hear maybe a scientist who thinks differently, not necessarily somebody from the industry, and also more analysis about the logic of the industry, why we have the system. That you mentioned a little bit about the lobbying machine and so on, but I think that could have been much stronger, why there is no really driver to change the whole situation. And although you dedicated the music to your film, to your friend to make the music, I really felt the music was very much leading the story, or kind of manipulating me in some way. You know, when there was a sad story, there was accompanying music and so on. So I felt it was too strong for a documentary. Thank you.
Excuse me, what is your background? I'm just curious. I mean, are you?
Somebody who's, I think I'm a consumer who I know about these risks for 30 years and I don't buy any of those products. Yeah.
Okay. So you don't really have a question, or do you have a question, or was it just a comment? Oh, okay, great. Okay. Yes. Oh, sorry. The gentleman here in front was first.
Yeah, I'm afraid mine will be more of a comment to, in the same, or not in the same direction, but I think I support the case and the cause, but especially for that reason, I was a bit bothered by some of the rhetorics. Like you giving numbers about rise in some diseases, and even though you say something about there are other explanations about it, you still give these figures. Well, probably a lot of these rise is explained, for example, by better diagnosis. So you should actually take that out if you want to use this as a proof for the problem with chemicals. And also people saying, yeah, I was healthy and then I got breast cancer. That's very unfair, of course, but it's not an explanation. It's, yeah, that's what happens with diseases. And also I don't want to insult anyone, but the problem with the couple who want to have kids and eventually they get, but then the one dies, probably the problem there is more that we're in a society where we cannot accept that our body tells us something is impossible than that there were chemicals.
You want to respond to that?
That's a lot. I'm trying to think how to respond. Anything about it?
Juliet wants to respond.
Maybe you can respond to the final, that's the hardest one.
Right.
But I'll just respond to the, and I have no interest in this, I'm not involved in this film, I just have been doing a lot of research in this area. Regarding the better diagnosis, I hear that argument a lot. I just wanted to say that these diseases are increasing so quickly, and they're increasing the last 20 to 30 years, that the diagnosis methods have not changed much. So for the cancers, if you had a cancer 30 years ago, you were diagnosed the same way you are now. So that argument doesn't hold for their things like sperm quality and that kind of thing. That's something that's changed. You know, looking at how sperm. There's also evidence that chemicals have something to do with decreasing sperm quality throughout the world. That's something that's changed with diagnosis. Or diagnosis plays a role, but cancers, I don't think so.
For example, autism. That are kind of.
I don't think we're claiming that chemicals are the sole reason for these diseases to rise. I think we're saying that these diseases are rising. Nobody knows why. Don't you think studying the chemicals that we all come in contact with every day would be a good thing to do? Wouldn't you like to know what's in the shampoo that you buy?
No, exactly. But I do support the cause, and I do support what you say. But it makes it a bit too easy for people who do not when you use this kind of figures instead of.
Yeah, you mean like this is increasing and that, but that doesn't mean that the one is caused by the other. That's what.
Yeah, but nobody's doing the research, so that's the first step.
And one of the sound bites and interviews that we had with Dr. Tracy Woodruff in the film said something that really always sticks with me is that genetics don't change over 50 years in these kind of ways. And so even if and another one of our researchers said, part of the rise is due to this. So there could be other reasons for the rise, but these things are all going up, and what else is going up? It's not a definite correlation, but I think industry is banking on the fact that people are going to be too skeptical to even study it. So, I mean, we all hope it's not the case that all of these things are causing. I mean, I have 3 little children. I hope they're all safe, but I'm not convinced that they are. And so I think it's okay to be not convinced the other way, but are we totally convinced that they're safe? I doubt it, too.
Well, maybe we should see the film also as a wake-up call, because we're not even thinking about the subject. After I've seen this film, now I am. So maybe I have a last question. Could you give 3 practical tips for me and the people in the audience what we can do to limit the risk of these dangerous chemicals in our everyday life?
Sure, I have a non-expensive one and an expensive one. So I open all the doors and the windows of my house almost all the time, so that the air quality is, all these toxic things which I'm trying to avoid.
But we live in a city.
I know. But they say that the indoor air quality of a home is much worse than the outdoor air quality, even if you live next to an oil refinery. That's that many chemicals in your house that you can't control. So I'm always opening all my doors and windows. And then I limit the products I buy, and I just don't want to support companies that have bad chemicals with my dollars, with my hard-earned dollars. So I really try to know what I can buy. Those are my tips.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just suggest that people the Dutch audience watch a documentary that's going to air on Dutch television on December 19th in Zembla. And Zembla is a Dutch science documentary, and they're looking at ways we could avoid exposure, in particular pregnant women, and looking at how other countries in Europe may have seem to have gone even in further steps to avoid exposure in this really sensitive time of life. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming and the film, and I enjoyed it very much. Give him a big applause.